Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the alumni panel, The Purpose of the Global Corporation. How will it change with the global marketplace? I'm Robert Smith, longtime host of NPR's global economics podcast, Planet Money, and a new professor here at Columbia University, where I run the Knight Bagehot Fellowship in Economics and Business Journalism. I'm also a proud alumnus of Columbia Business School. And one of the things I loved about Columbia was watching the promise of globalization in real time. You'd meet these amazing students from around the globe, you'd work together for 2 years, and then you'd get to see those students return to their home countries and tackle the challenges and the opportunities of an interconnected world. I've been thinking about my fellow alumni a lot over the last few years, as it seems there are more and more challenges and risks than ever. There are new trade barriers, the pandemic, supply chain troubles, and then a war in Europe. How do global companies plan for a future that seems more uncertain day by day? And what is the role of a corporation in a changing world? We've brought together some amazing alumni from the Columbia Business School to answer that question. Because of the challenges of time zones, we're going to tackle this in two parts. First, we have two alumni who do business around the world and have unique insights into globalization and corporations. The first is Laurent Ganem, founder and chief executive of G Square, a private equity firm dedicated to investing in healthcare. G Square invests in healthcare service chains, including surgeries, medical devices, diagnostics, mental health services, home care, and across Europe and Israel, and more. Welcome, Laurent.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Also on our panel, Rahul Kanodia, Vice Chairman and CEO of Datamatics. Datamatics helps companies around the world with digital solutions, helping them gather and analyze data, and that includes automation, AI, and robotics. Welcome, Rahul.
Thank you, Robert. Nice to be here with you.
So I think about the corporation as a way to provide a sense of stability in a world that's changing, because a global corporation allows you to invest in different markets, in different businesses. And so if there's risks in one, maybe those risks won't be in others. It gives you both opportunities, and more risks. Starting with Rahul, these days, do you see more opportunities or more risks?
I think there are many more opportunities these days, but there are different kinds, and therefore the organization has to be far more nimble, far more dynamic and agile in adapting to the current situation in the market, as well as also capturing the opportunities. The opportunities come out very fast, probably in a few months it's there. They last for a shorter period as well, and therefore you've got to move very, very quickly to capture them. The longer ones would last probably 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Shorter ones could last even maybe 6 months or a year. For example, we have the war in Ukraine right now. As a company, Datamatics has in a way benefited because some of the customers who are working in Ukraine now would want to shift the work out of Ukraine because those people are not able to work, obviously for obvious reasons. So in that sense, there's an opportunity that we have to capture very fast. But some of them, like automation and robotics, is an opportunity that lasts for the next 5 years. So it varies depending on what you're trying to do. Different businesses, of course, react differently. In India, when we went into a lockdown during COVID 2 years ago, it was an announcement by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He announced, and in 4 hours, the entire country was in lockdown. And you only had a 4-hour window to do anything. And therefore, how do you dynamically change and get your operations up and running where people didn't even have time to go to the office and pick up the laptops or something like that. So the world we are living in is unusually dynamic, and with that brings its own challenges, but also the opportunities. And we've been able to do things where we could ramp up 600 people in 2 days and work new recruits in 2 days, work, get the projects delivered, and then ramp down again. And that was a very unique and different kind of a challenge. And being a global organization that allows you to tap into talent in different parts of the world. So we could tap into the Philippines and India and the US and Europe simultaneously to ensure that the projects don't suffer.
Laurent, we're seeing a lot more what I would call correlation. There was a day where what was happening in Finland was different than what was happening in Israel. But a lot of the trends I talked about are correlated trends. Certainly, the pandemic that went around the world, but also supply chain problems, which popped up in the United States and of course spread to Europe, and we see in Asia. So, Laurent, are you seeing the sort of same problems pop up in your different businesses around the world, and are they faster, like Rahul says?
No, I mean it's very interesting. I mean, COVID changed the paradigm to some extent. Before the lockdowns in various countries, which happened actually at different times in different manners. We were sort of in denial. It was a Chinese problem, then it became an Italian problem, and then suddenly it became a French problem, and it became a UK problem, and then the rest of Europe. I mean, it was kind of very strange. But when it appeared that the lockdown was coming, we had at the time 16 portfolio companies in I would say 9-10 countries altogether. So we actually sat down virtually because we couldn't go to the office anymore. We initiated the Zoom and Teams meetings with the entire team. Actually, we set up a Zoom and team meeting every day, 8:30, the entire team, to keep them motivated and to keep the cohesion within our firm. And we looked at each and every situation in each and every country. And we decided that first of all, we needed to make sure that those companies had enough cash to actually survive, which was the most important thing. And then we also wanted to make sure that we would take the right measures to maximize the opportunity and to maximize attacking the challenges, and in particular. With regards to various countries, different responses from governments, which is quite interesting. In a country like the UK, there was a furlough system where you could actually be reimbursed by the government for people not working, closing down. For instance, the dental, as you mentioned, the dental facility were closed down for 2 months, so there was a big impact, but it was mitigated by the fact that it was actually compensated by the government, which happened in the different countries at different level. In France, for instance, there were loans which were very cheap and for a long time, etc., etc. So that happened in different manner in various countries, if you see what I mean. But what was also very important is that you're talking about opportunities and challenges. I mean, that created incredible opportunities. We invested in 2 telehealth companies during that COVID crisis, one in Israel, one in France, and their business saw an incredible boost. We also had in our portfolio company, which is distributing prescription drugs on the web. Again, people couldn't go out to go to pharmacies, so it actually more than doubled the volume of this company. So some companies suffered to some extent. Some were very resilient because they had to continue carrying the business, and some were extraordinarily boosted, and their value increased tremendously over that period. So it was really a period where we saw so much change in not only the portfolio but also the way we manage the firm here.
Well, it's fascinating because you're both talking about the value of diversification. Even if the risks are correlated, even if we're seeing the same thing happen in many different companies, the way the specific sectors respond is nuanced, the way governments respond is different. And so it sounds like you both still believe that the best bet is to be global and have a lot of different businesses. That's the best way to fight risk. Am I getting that right, Rahul?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any alternative. Being a parochial or company doesn't work anymore. You have to
because you could be crushed in a moment.
Absolutely, and being global, you're tapping into global resources, which makes you far more resilient.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, one of the reasons I moved from Paris to London is that I wanted to have a multicultural, multinational team within my private equity firm that I was just forming. And I could not attract non-French talents to Paris. I mean, people go to Paris because they love wine or food or whatever, but London was actually, the place to be where, and I have today, a team of around 25 people, and I have 14 different nationalities, and many languages spoken. So this is the way I see globalization. And I have not only Europeans, but I have also Chinese, I have a Singaporean, I have an Indian, etc. So lots of people from around Europe, but also from around the world. And that's what brings the diversity within our firm.
So at Columbia Business School, I think we all were taught similar lessons about the value of globalization. And one of the things that we were taught is this idea of sort of just-in-time inventory, of reducing your amount of items you have on hand, and really trusting the global supply chains to be able to deliver what you need when you need it. And in fact, the more just-in-time you are, the more successful your company can be. And it sure seemed to work for a decade or so. As we've seen these supply chain issues around the world, are you changing your point of view on this, Laurent, especially because I know that you both manufacture items and obviously in the medical field use an enormous number of supplies from probably every country in the world?
Yeah, I can give you one example. I mean, we have a chain of the largest chain of dental clinics in France, for instance, and we have about 120 dental clinics, and we have lots of dentists and lots of implants. And we actually created a joint venture with in Shenzhen in China with a manufacturer, because all the dental crowns are manufactured over there. I mean, the vast majority of those implants are manufactured over there. And so when COVID struck, we actually went into a huge problem, because there was the lockdown in China and so on and so forth. So we needed to find other sources of other alternative sources to actually provide what we needed to provide. And it led us to revise the way we actually work today into more diversification, sincerely. It's very dangerous to have one source, even if it is the cheapest, and it can be delivered just in time. So that's one aspect. So diversification. And the second thing which taught us during those crises is digitalization. All our companies became digitalized. And in particular, in the case of dental, now the dental imprints are done, electronically and digitally. And the manufacturing is starting to become 3D printing instead of actually importing from China. So you relocate some of that. You take care of that supply chain problem by relocating part of your production, thanks to the new technologies on site, which I think is extremely important. Another last example, it's not exactly supply chain, but the way digitalization, helped tackle all that crisis. We have a chain of schools where we give healthcare and medical healthcare education in various countries in Europe and in Latin America. Overnight, those schools were delivering, of course, the teaching in classrooms. And overnight, we actually transformed it into digital teaching. And it worked beautifully well, because actually we grew tremendously thanks to the digital teaching. And we actually converted our company into probably 70% digital and 30% physical.
Oh, interesting. Rahul, you deal in data and software and technology, so a lot of that is not affected by supply chain issues, right? Data can move freely around the world. But it did occur to me that you still have some of these specific risks if you rely on just one country or just one source for data and work. If you have call centers in the Philippines and the Philippines has a stay-at-home order, then you have to similarly have a flexibility? Are you changing anything for your company?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So it's not as straightforward as that. So, for example, when we work with banks, a large segment of our work is with banks and financial institutions. You're accessing personal financial data of customers. And they get very nervous when you work from home because you don't know who's accessing what information, and there could be a data privacy issue or a data violation of personal information. So that area gets into a lot of trouble. When you have people working remotely, in India, you have different kinds of challenges. People would go back to tier 3 cities, tier 4 cities, or sometimes they come from a village. You have a power outage. There's no power for 3 or 4 hours. The guy can't work. So his internet is down, his laptop is not working. If his machine breaks down, how do you service it? Because he's in a remote town, how do you get it back? How do you send an engineer there and fix it? And then if a guy resigns, you've got to collect the machine back. A new employee comes in a new town. So all of those logistics are very different. So yeah, it's easy to work remotely in the software world, but there are practical challenges that you have. In India, particularly, people live in large families and small homes. So if the guy's on a conference call and the family members around and there's ambient noise, that's disturbing. So these are practical challenges in ultimately delivering on your projects. So you've got to handle these in very different ways.
Have any of the companies that you consult for come to you about these supply chain issues and said, help us change the way we do business so that we're not affected the next time parts don't arrive or countries get shut down?
So it has happened. To what Lauren was saying is more from a digital process automation perspective, where companies want to have more and more digital processes, and we do a lot of that type of work. So their reliance on the traditional brick and mortar processes or paperwork is substantially reduced, and they're able to work remotely. But in terms of manufacturing and supply, I guess Lauren would have a better perspective on that than I would.
Well, it's interesting because you both seem to be saying that we've talked a good game on globalization, but having one customer in China or one supply chain that goes to the Philippines isn't truly globalization. Yes, your products are moving around the world, but a true sense of globalization is maybe thinking bigger than that, having more sources, having more customers, having more countries. The sort of scale and true globalization fights against the problems of specific small problems with countries and supply chains.
That is correct. I think what's very interesting is a mindset shift. In some respects, from a political perspective, you see countries becoming more regional and more parochial about their own countries and their own nationalities. And then on the business front, you have no choice but to get global and to get more nimble and spread your wings. And these kind of coexist and also contradict each other simultaneously. So how do you, play that game where, just to take example, a French would say, look, I want French people working, but then now you've got people in Manila and people in South Africa and people in Israel working as well. And how do you deliver that when there's an element of, no, we only want our people working? And so the political agenda and the business agenda slightly contradict, but at the same time, it gives you tremendous value if you can balance the two.
I fully agree. I mean, we have an example. Our Israeli company is subcontracting some of the IT development in Ukraine, and so we had 20 people working for us in Ukraine. And before all this happened, we offered them to come to Israel, and actually only 4 of them decided to move to Israel. The rest remained, and they're not working anymore. It's very difficult for them to work, so we have to replace them. But it shows that the geopolitical events or environment can tremendously influence, of course, the fate of companies.
Well, one thing that companies rely on is stability and the rule of law and good courts. Because as you were making decisions about which countries you work with and deal with and have invest in and have as resources, you need to make sure that they're safe in terms of doing business, but also safe in terms of the future of your investment. After the invasion of Ukraine, what we saw was, I think, fairly stunning in terms of sanctions against Russia from the United States and from Europe that happened rather quickly. But more than that, an almost international backlash against companies doing business in Russia, which meant that for a lot of companies, and I should say neither of you work in Russia, but for a lot of companies, they had to almost immediately divest from Russia, move resources out of Russia at a moment's notice. When you saw that, did either of you think in the back of your mind, like, this is a risk I haven't prepared for? I need to change the way I'm prepared to maybe leave a country at a moment's notice. Let's start with Laurent.
Well, our investments are in Western Europe. We actually have not invested in Eastern Europe yet. And for the moment, to tell you the truth, we're not trying to generate any deal flow in Eastern Europe. The reality is that we feel pretty safe in Western Europe, although Finland, it's next door to Russia. But at the end of the day, maybe again, we are like with COVID initially in denial, but we think that there is some serious stability in that part of the world more than in any other part of the world. I would say so. The answer is not really. The thing which has changed is the fact that we're raising in a fund, and my question has been to the investors and my placement agent whether the Americans who are potential investors in our fund investing in Europe would say we don't want to put money in Europe anymore because there is a war, it's dangerous, and so on and so forth, even if we are investing in Western Europe. And I don't have the answer yet. The answer will come soon.
Rahul, beyond war, you have companies in many different countries and customers in many different countries. And it doesn't have to necessarily be war these days. It could be the way a president of a country treats human rights. It could be something that maybe some country decides they're going to send arms to Russia, and all of a sudden there's a worldwide backlash. Do you worry about this, Rahul?
Not so much in terms of that, because, we've had actually this war between Russia and Ukraine is not, well, we've had the war in Afghanistan. Before that, we had the war in Kuwait. Now we have Russia and Ukraine. So you've had wars in the last 2 decades. And I'm sure over the next 1 decade, there'll be some other war somewhere. And some are smaller, some are bigger. You've had this funny situation with the COVID situation where pretty much all countries went into lockdown. And mobility of people across borders almost came to a standstill across all countries. And I know we had employees in some, Fiji Island who got stuck there because he couldn't go. Somebody was in Korea, got stuck there, couldn't move. So we've had these situations. So I think one has to be mindful of this dynamic change, and where it's not only about war, but you could get stuck in a country, or you could not travel out or in different situations. And I think that is going to repeat itself in some shape or form as we go along. And therefore, as an organization, whether it's war, whether it's COVID, whether it's something else, maybe just a political standoff. It may not be war also, but just a political issue. India and Pakistan keep having political issues. Sometimes they do close their airspace for each other. It does happen. With China, we had a border skirmish from India. So these things do happen. It doesn't have to be nasty, but it does create business challenges depending on where you're interacting with. One as an organization, one has to be prepared because you don't know which direction it's going to come from.
Robert, if I may, there is one thing that I would like to add, which is something which is becoming sort of mainstream and big trend is called ESG. And maybe a couple of years ago you never heard of it in America. But sincerely, it was invented in Europe by the private equity association in Europe who decided that it had to be done, and then the UN, created the UN PRIs and all the rest, etc. And we've been very much into this. Actually, we signed the UN PRI at D Square in 2012, so we were a very young company at the time, so that's 10 years. And this has become extremely important, I think, all over the world. And I think this is part also of the way globalization will look like in the future. I don't know if you would agree.
Rahul, how does this affect you, the ESG?
Well, so we've been doing a fair amount of work with some of the rating agencies in helping them rate companies on ESG parameters. And there's no standardization right now. Each one uses a different norm.
Not yet.
But yeah, so it's very interesting. There's more talk about it than actual action. So there's still right now, I think a lot more work needs to be done on ESG. Is it a good move? Yeah, absolutely, yes. Does it impact operations of companies? Not quite as yet. It may, depending on how the regulations come in. But as of today, still early stages. So is it impacting my business? No. Will it impact in the next 5 to 10 years? Yes. And we'll have to sort of see how to blend it into our operations.
It's just so very interesting that I think maybe people had a slightly wrong view of globalization where they thought, with true globalization, it's all about markets and businesses, and we can sort of ignore politics and borders and country lines and the various ESG concerns of the constituents of a country. And it's just become entirely clear that yes, there may still be the dream of doing businesses in every market, of sourcing wherever the best products can be found, of really sending investment around the world. But the last 2 years have really reminded us that you are corporations that exist in a place, that do businesses in other places with people and governments and things that can go wrong.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I think, we see the impact. I mean, we're as you said, Rahul, the KPIs are not defined properly, and we're trying actually to define the KPI within our industry in order not to be dictated by civil servants who don't really understand what business means. But you're going to Finland. We actually experienced something, in the Finnish company we had at the time where we had about 1,500 people employed, and twice a month pay slips paper. Mm. And so we immediately said, okay, let's do it electronically, instead of paper. We'll kill less trees. And we did that very quickly. And we saved something like 60 or 70,000 euros a year, just like that. So ESG is good for the world, for the environment, but also it's a good business practice.
Yeah, and a good opportunity for you, Rahul, who deals in data and cloud services.
Absolutely, exactly.
Well, listen, I want to thank you. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying that I think as companies work globally, I think the other element that's very important for them is how do they become sensitive to the local challenges in each country and the social challenges in those countries, and they're different. I think as a corporation, it's important that they step up to those challenges and deliver a social benefit outside of the corporate agenda to those local communities. And I think that's very critical. It's not really part of the ESG system per se in that sense, but nevertheless a very important element for global corporations.
Well, but if I may, sorry,
yes, go on.
Just to add just one word, if it's okay. We've not talked about labor, but I think that's also an important part of the debate. Labor shortage, in various jurisdictions, in various let's say countries. Sincerely, in the UK, we've had Brexit, which has not made things easy. because we have shortage in our companies, that's for sure. But also, and we all went to Columbia Business School. It seems to me that the new generation. I don't want to look like the old, who is saying it was better before. But it seemed that the young generations want everything now and more. Rather than actually be patient, and to me, it's very difficult to manage, to tell you the truth. I sincerely, we don't know exactly how to tackle this problem, and maybe you can help us. Maybe Rahul, you have the recipe.
we thrive in that environment. That's what brings about change, and that's digital automation, and that's digital change. So we thrive in that. I'd love to certainly engage on that count.
Well, in the second half of our panel, we will talk about labor, and we'll talk about what the corporation owes to the countries that it operates in. We'll bring that up, but we'll end this part of the conversation. Thank you very much, Laurent Ghanem, Rahul Kanodia. Thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much for this.
It's our pleasure to be here.